Major General's gonna make it tonight. Okay. Well, my clock shows 6:30, so I'm gonna go ahead and call to order the Board of Zoning Appeals first.
Yeah, so before you call roll,
Oh.
I'd just like to introduce that we do have a new board member,
Yes.
Bethany Falvey.
Welcome,
So
welcome.
we'd like to welcome her to the board. And then if we want to go ahead and ask for a roll call, I can do that.
Okay. There's the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for Thursday, January 19th. We'll kick things off with a roll call to determine if there's quorum.
Falvey? Here. Clark?
Here.
Gardner?
He's right. No, no, it's not.
It's Stephen.
Shalinski?
Here.
Wampler?
Here.
Weisner?
Here.
Herrick?
Here.
And we have four.
Great. Then item B, communications. Are there any communications before the board tonight?
We have no additional communications except for the item that Caitlin has put before you, a little handout communication I received after the packet postings.
Are there any disclosures of ex parte communications or abstentions for any of these agenda items tonight? Okay, seeing none, are there any that will be deferred tonight?
We did have two deferrals which were posted prior to the packet, so those are noticed in the agenda.
Great. All right, then, my next agenda item here is minutes. To consider the approval of minutes from November 7th meeting. Is this a real agenda item?
It is.
Move approval.
Okay.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And any abstentions?
I abstain.
All right, then let's move on to the public hearing portion. We have item number 1, variance for something at 722 Ash Street. We'll hear from staff.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Luke Mortensen, and as Mr. Clark just noted, the first item tonight is a request to consider a variance from the required surfacing materials for driveways and parking areas as expressed in Article 9 of the Land Development Code. The applicant seeks to utilize gravel as a driveway material in addition to 3 concrete parking pads and a steel perimeter edging for a detached dwelling under construction at 722 Ash Street. A little background, the subject property was platted and recorded in 2018 as Lot 2 of Duganville subdivision. There's a detached dwelling under construction at this time. Both the lot and the house that's being built have come into existence under the city's current land development code. And before we get into our 5 normal criteria, I'll just briefly touch on kind of an interesting component to this variance request. There's a shared driveway curb cut and access easement that was established when the 2 lots were platted back in 2018. So our property shares a curb cut and portion of the driveway with 718 Ash Street. This variance request is strictly addressing 722 Ash Street, which includes the entire easement, and the curb cut is off of 722. Staff will remind the board that it approved a variance for the driveway surfacing materials for 718 Ash Street back in 2018, but the request at hand tonight should be considered totally independent of that previous variance request. And I'll go ahead and get started with our 5 criteria. Question number 1 revolves around uniqueness. The variance request at hand is not due to a condition based off of zoning or platting, and it's not totally unique to the property in question. The sandy alluvial soil conditions, the lack of elevation change, and the shallow water table are conditions that are found across North Lawrence. The subject property is encumbered by Zone X, which is an unregulated floodplain. It has a 0.2% chance of annual flooding, also known as the 500-year floodplain. This Zone X covers virtually all of North Lawrence, and then multiple portions of the rest of the city. Question number 2 concerns the rights of adjacent property owners or residents. Notice was provided to property owners within 400 feet of the subject property. At the time that the staff report was written, did not have any neighbor inquiries. However, the property owner to the west, 718 Ash, has submitted some photos and an email, a support email that we have provided to you. There was an item yesterday and then another item today. Staff does not believe the granting of the driveway variance would adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners. A gravel driveway would not restrict any property from continuing to exist as a code-compliant detached dwelling. Our third criteria involves unnecessary hardships. Staff does not believe requiring the applicant to install a code-compliant driveway material rises to the level of unnecessary hardship. All new driveways outside of the FEMA designated zones, flood zones A, AE, and AH, are held to the standards expressed in Article 9 of the code. Staff is aware that the ground conditions in North Lawrence and the ground conditions in North Lawrence, and the code is aware of that too. It lays out design options for surfacing materials that would be more permeable than traditional concrete or asphalt driveways. Our Building Safety Division actually just reviewed and approved a detached dwelling that is using concrete strips with a grass median. That would be a code-compliant parking material, and it would also allow for some groundwater infiltration. I'm going to jump out of my notes a little bit, but we've talked about this in past meetings. The code also takes into consideration pervious and impervious percentages in our density and dimensional standards. So it already thinks about what zoning district you're in, and it has a stated maximum building cover of maximum impervious surface. So the code and staff are thinking about that when we review our applications. Gravel driveways are not the only or the most efficient option for reducing stormwater flooding events. In fact, when layers of gravel and underlying soil are continually compacted by vehicles, its capacity to absorb stormwater and facilitate infiltration can be reduced, depending on maintenance and upkeep. Criteria number 4 talks about adverse effects. Staff believes granting this variance may adversely affect the public health, safety, morals, order, convenience, prosperity, and general welfare. Our municipal services and operations staff have indicated in discussions that loose gravel can and does end up in the road right-of-way. It can and does cause damage to vehicles when it's kicked up, at vehicle speed as flying debris. It can and does also sometimes settle in exposed and underground stormwater sewage systems or stormwater drainage systems, and it can sometimes create a layer of sediment, and that can reduce the capacity and efficiency of those systems. Finally, it's been noted that during dry or windy conditions, neighborhoods that have large quantities of these gravel driveways, there can be dust that settles on structures and vehicles across property lines. So the final criteria concerns the spirit and intent of the code. Staff concluded that approving the variance request would be opposed to the spirit and intent of the Land Development Code. Article 9 regulates parking, loading, and access areas. Its stated purpose is to create safe parking areas that do not adversely affect surrounding properties and land uses while allowing for flexibility based on different environmental conditions. So the code intends to find that balance between environmental conditions and a safe and efficient transportation system, of which driveways and parking areas are a part. At this time, the code recognizes that, and it permits gravel as an option for those that are in the FEMA mapped regulatory floodplain. And then there are various pervious options for those that are not in that regulatory floodplain. Planning staff are drafting a number of amendments to the existing parking article of the code, and one of those proposed amendments is removing gravel as a permitted driveway material in all areas of the city. And it would be replaced with additional pervious options, such as pervious concrete, like we talked about, those concrete strips and grass medians. This is a potential, if it's adopted by the City Commission, that would be an amendment to our code. To wrap up, Staff could not conclude that the proposed variance met all 5 criteria and recommends the board deny the variance to use gravel as a driveway surfacing material for the property addressed as 722 Ash Street. Some reps of the applicant are here tonight, and I'll just say they've been really great applicants, really helpful at answering questions, and engaged in the process. So I can stand for questions, otherwise the applicant is here tonight.
This has a shared easement with
Yep.
718?
Yep, and I'm going to actually have a document that shows where that easement is located. And I'm going to turn on the... We're on. Are we having technical difficulties?
I can see it on YouTube, but can't see it here in the room.
Okay, I might bring it up.
There it is.
So this is a copy of the replat that was done back in 2018. Lot 2, oops, sorry. This is the subject property, this is Ash Street. This 20 by 35 foot square is where the 2 driveways come together. They were given a variance in 2018. This is what we're talking about tonight.
Cool. I see that it's in your staff report on page 6 as well. The variance that was granted to 718, how is the variance handled when it is across an easement?
So that variance was for only that property. I think in the minutes, it's noted that 722, at the time of development, if they chose to have a gravel driveway, would have to come in and seek their own variance. So that's how we got to tonight.
But if this variance is denied,
It would be a gravel meets concrete point.
somewhere outside of the easement?
It would be where 718 meets the easement along the property line.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
At this time, we'd like to hear from the applicant.
Hi, this is Nora and Leah. We're with Studio 804 requesting the application. We're requesting a gravel drive for our residents as we believe it will assimilate our design with the 5 adjacent neighbors that are next to our property. We believe that this design for a gravel drive will assimilate us with these 5 residences in the 700 block. There are also a total of 14 residences with gravel drives on the 700 block. And we also believe that this design will better assimilate us to our neighbors at 718 Ash Street, as we share a driveway in the shared easement. We also believe that the proposed gravel drive and existing apron reduces the amount of particulates that could possibly get into the storm system, as opposed to a traditional concrete drive.
Another thing is we are going for LEED Platinum for our buildings, so sustainability is something that's really important to us. And we believe that a gravel driveway will be more permeable, thus more sustainable, kind of following our building desire.
Thank you. Anything else?
You should do it.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I have a question. The code, at least for certain flood areas, maybe not this one, envisions allowing gravel with a concrete edge, and you're proposing a metal edge?
Yeah, we're proposing, so it would be similar to what is at 718 Ash Street. So we're proposing between 4 to 7 inch metal edging along the concrete, or along the gravel.
Now, when you say 4 to 7 inches, that's
That's
vertical
the
or
vertical
horizontal?
edging. That's the vertical edging that would hold the gravel back
Okay.
from being thrown around to other sites.
Thank you.
And that matches what's next door, yeah.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about why the research in it having more particles go into the water versus concrete.
So the way that we're thinking that, we know that the city is concerned with gravel getting into the stormwater system, and we also want to match what our neighbors have. So we're thinking that the concrete apron and the steel edging that's along the side would prevent any more gravel from coming into the concrete, or from coming into the stormwater system. So we want to match what our neighbors have, and we think that, of course, as you guys kind of asked just now, it would look awkward to have a concrete drive and then gravel and then a concrete apron. So in order to match that, we believe our design is the best to not only match our neighbors, but also to prevent anything else from getting into the stormwater system. And then we are also, as it's stated in the application, providing a concrete 485 square feet of concrete pads for parking the car.
If you go to page 4, you can see the pads and the diagram of the steel edging and everything as well.
Is that sufficient?
I still didn't understand what, I think I didn't, the part of the question so why do you had mentioned in your original statement that you felt like this gravel that you're proposing is less, would be less sediment or whatever going into the sewer system than concrete would be, and is there,
Is there
did you
proof
have, yeah.
No, I guess what I'm trying to say is we think that in order to match what I think less might have been the wrong word. As far as trying to match what our neighbors have in their design, and then for our design, what would be best for not only just allowing our site to be more permeable. See, if we have concrete, if we use a concrete driveway, we'll have 32% of the site be impervious. But if it's gravel, it'll only be 19%. And so we understand that there's a possibility that gravel, like we understand the city's concern about gravel getting in, but we just believe this design would be best to assimilate our house to the neighbors. But as far as proof of that, I think less is the wrong word. It's just the best design for what is given on site now.
Also,
Thank you.
kind of piggybacking off of that, like you said, there's 32% that would then be impervious, and then you'd have all that water running off going through the already established shared easement. So you would end up kind of having more of more gravel would then go from our concrete through our gravel onto the street, as opposed to it being gravel throughout the whole thing.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I think I know the answer to this, but I want to get your opinion.
Okay.
Even though we're not in a floodplain per se,
Right.
is flooding a concern at this property with, let's just say, a significant rain event?
So our site does, towards the south, it's a foot higher, and then towards the north, where it meets Ash Street, is a foot lower. So having water there would be, so the water would meet the concrete apron, and so then that would allow less water to pool in front of our site. But from what we've seen, being on construction site next to 718 since September, we haven't had any issues with water pooling or any sort of flood issues in our site.
So you guys have only been there since September?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question. Have you guys looked into any of the other options for surfacing?
I've noticed that there was asphalt for that. We have not looked at the asphalt option. We've noticed that in past projects that this not-for-profit has done, they've done concrete pads for strips for your tires to run along, and we've just noticed that people who tend to buy the house have a hard time, like, following the concrete pad. So another reason that gravel would be best is not only does it fit our design, but it also would be easier for the user to drive along.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
At this time, we will open up the public portion of the agenda item.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Evans, and I'm the owner of the property at 718 Ash, just to the west and adjacent to 722 Ash. And Luke, I know I got my photographs in kind of late. Were they able to see the photographs?
We've all got 'em. Yeah.
Particularly the ones from Ash Street that show the apron and the easement area, and then the drive.
Were those from yesterday or today?
Pardon me?
Were those from yesterday or today?
Today.
So those would have been the paper copies that you're looking at.
Okay. Well, I would suggest that the photographs tell more of the story about what's going on here than the site plan and the subdivision plans. And we have, I was here in October of 2018 with our builder, and the person who was thinking about building and buying 722, and at the time, we went through all of the same great criteria that Leah and Nora went through, but we did go through in pretty great detail the sustainability aspects of this, and the fact that we really did want a shared easement in an older property where there was one drive going into an old property, and it really didn't make a whole lot of sense to spend the money and create the topographical challenges to have two different drives into two different properties. So the shared easement made a whole lot of sense to us for a lot of reasons. But in 2018, really not a heck of a lot has changed since 2018 in October to now in terms of why we think this is a good idea. And I guess I could say in summary that we obviously support the variance for our new neighbors, and that's the primary thing I want to say here. I won't go into the detail, the sustainability aspects that have been covered quite well here, and I think really when you look at pervious surfaces in Lawrence, there's probably some arguments about it may not be appropriate for commercial projects, but I think if you scale it down and look at more residential, more smaller scale projects, it seems to make a whole lot of sense. And the good news is we've lived here for a year and a half, so we're not guessing about how this works and how it functions. I can report to you what we've experienced since October of 2018. The material, there is an argument for the material migrating onto Ash Street, onto any street, and to our properties. And I did send some photographs with details of the steel edging, and it really works. There's several details, several properties on Walnut, particularly on Walnut Street, that use this very same detail. And that's been in place for several years. I assume that those properties got a variance, but I really don't know. Some of those were built back in, 10, 12 years ago. But with the concrete apron on Ash Street, there's very little, very minimal migration of the pea gravel. And keep in mind, this is pea gravel. These are little tiny little pieces of gravel. It's not sand. And it's got an underlayment of a road material that allows it to be compacted. but still pervious. And I think in, the 15 months we've lived there, I've gone out a couple of times and either swept the pea gravel off the apron, not off of Ash Street, because if you get a rain or if you get a snow or something, nature cleans it up for you. But as far as our property goes, the pea gravel has not migrated onto our yard, onto our landscape material, or onto Ash Street in any measurable, maintenance-related issue. And I read this in the last few days, the staff report. Luke, correct me if I don't have this right, but the recorded easement requires materials to be consistent between 722, 718, and the shared easement. Now, that's a little different than what you presented.
There's no requirement that the materials be the same. The variance is talking about the entirety of the easement. Because
Okay.
the easement is totally located on this subject property.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, now what? The easement is located, it's a shared easement.
It's a shared easement, but the.
So it's not
the physical
located on either
location of the-
property?
What?
It's not located on either property. It's located on both properties.
No, it's not. This is the document, the recorded easement, the 20 by 35 foot
Right.
space is on lot 2, on the subject property.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. In terms of the plan orientation.
In terms of the lot, the land records
Okay.
and how the register of deeds
Okay.
would see it.
Nonetheless, it's a shared easement.
Correct.
With maintenance responsibilities, so it could be located really anywhere in that area and be a shared easement.
But it's recorded in this location.
Got it. Fine, thank you for clarifying that. I think, I would consider it a hardship if, for us, and I've always had a little trouble kind of getting my arms around that word hardship in your criteria. And you all helped me a year and a half ago when I was here trying to kind of figure that out. But honestly, for us, if the easement was required to be changed, that would be a hardship for us in many ways, in terms of the design and the geometry of configuring whatever, if it were concrete ribbons or concrete sides, it would be rather difficult to design something that would work well for both properties. It can be done, but I think it would be a really awkward way to enter the properties. So I think for me, it would really be a hardship for us to have to deal with that at this stage in the game. And really, I mean, we pointed this out before, and Leah and Nora did too, gravel driveways are more reflective of the existing conditions in North Lawrence than any other kind of material, be it concrete or asphalt or dirt in some cases. So I think in terms of the character of the neighborhood, this is a whole lot more appropriate than concrete driveways at the end of the day. And I think that's a pretty big deal. We could talk a long time about the sustainability and the permeability of this material. We've been there for a year and a half, and the areas that we've driven on are pretty solid. They're easy to maintain, they're easy to drive on, they're easy to walk on, and we've experienced no ponding at all. So the material maintains its perviosity, if that's a word, but it works beautifully, and it's a whole lot nicer to look at than concrete or asphalt at the end of the day. You all did have some questions about ponding and pooling. Some of the photographs I sent Luke this morning showed, or actually yesterday, was part of the package yesterday, showed the conditions on Ash Street after rain events, and we had a bunch of them last year. And there are, and I don't even think I got the most dramatic photographs where some of the ponding and runoff from the properties on Ash Street, the pond actually goes to the median and sometimes goes over the crown of the street. And that is a hazard for everybody that lives there and everybody that drives there. And a solution of gravel and a pervious material really benefits those circumstances. And I think that would be true all along Ash Street, and it certainly is on our properties. I mean, you guys have seen the pooling and ponding out there, you know, after a rain now, and it's, you know, it's hard because of the sight lines coming out of our driveway. It's sometimes kind of difficult to see the traffic that's coming. It's a 22-foot wide street. It's a little residential, one-block road, but I think that's certainly something to be considered, and my perspective is it's a hardship for us, and it's a hardship for the city to have to try to maintain a ponding and a pooling condition. And what we're proposing would help alleviate that problem on Ash Street. Lastly, the original design idea for these two lots that have been subdivided was that they would be planned coherently, that we would use similar landscape materials and hardscape materials. We would have a shared driveway. We'd have good neighbors, you know, that hopefully people that looked into our site would see, well, gee, this was planned really well. And it's pleasing to look at, and it functions well. And what the Studio 804 folks have come up with has just made it even better. And I'd really encourage you to think in this context about approving this variance. It would really make our lives a whole lot easier, and I think would be the right solution. So that's all I have. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Mr. Chair, can I inquire this speaker?
Mm-hmm.
You've touched on some things that I'm interested, and I think I was here for you when you were here in October of
Oh, yeah.
2018.
Uh-huh.
I think I remember you, but, so you've been there for, 15 months now, you've said?
Right.
And so you've gotten to live even through that rainy season we had last winter through spring, is that right?
Yeah.
And so would you think that was a pretty good test run of the permeability of this driveway and how it reacts to big rain events?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Is it your experience that this neighborhood and the neighborhood around it has issues with water pooling and water runoff issues during rain events?
Yes.
Okay. Is it your opinion that the permeability of your driveway is preventing a lot of water from joining the rest of the runoff on the street?
Oh, yeah.
Let's
I mean,
imagine a hypothetical. What if your driveway and this driveway here at 722, let's imagine they're all concrete. Would that cause more water to join the water that's already pooling and running down Ash?
yeah,
We'll get
okay,
there.
go ahead.
And I think I remember, was there an issue of a pump failing in North Lawrence this last summer or spring during one of these rain events?
I think the issue with the pump in North Lawrence is a bigger scale issue.
But I'm just
And I
saying, was
think
there a
that,
pump that
yes,
failed in
the
Lawrence?
answer to
That
your
pump-
question is yes.
And was that pump was specifically there to help get rid of runoff and stormwater and stuff like that, right?
Throughout the entire neighborhood,
Okay.
yeah.
So you've been there long enough to see your driveway at 718 through a pretty wet spring, right?
Yep,
And it's your opinion that having that permeable driveway there to try to soak up some of that water I mean, probably help the rest of the neighborhood as far as not adding to pooling and runoff that's already occurring in that area. Is that right?
Well, that's my experience, that's not my opinion.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. If I could answer your question too, this apron is at a high point on Ash Street. We didn't require a culvert underneath the apron. So it's a high point, and water, our lot is graded to drain to the north and the south, as yours will be at the end of the day. So with a concrete drive, absolutely you'll get a lot of water running out to that high point and dispersing both to the east and the west in that ditch. So there'll be a lot more. And I don't think we saw any ponding on our driveway during all of those rain events. And I can tell you that when we were under construction, there was water running everywhere. And now with that permeability, it slows everything down and lets it kind of soak in. So our experience has been very positive.
Any other questions for public comment? All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Do you have any questions for staff or for the applicant before we begin discussion?
Can I ask staff? I think you kind of see where my questions are coming. You probably heard what I was asking Mr. Evans. It seems like we have a plan in our code, you know, what we want people building their driveways out of and whatnot, and then what we want to do with the water that's going to run off of that driveway. And I think you even speak to that a little bit in the staff report. But, so here's the question, just kind of set me on the right path. It seems like we have an issue where North Lawrence is fighting our plan, where we have a low-lying area, lots of water, some flooding issues, and it seems like even though these permeable driveways, at least as set forth like here in this application, are, you know, they're not favored by our code, it seems like they are in fact, you know, helping us in the struggle that we have in that area, where it's just every time we have an applicant come in here, or, you know, and other things that I do in the community, when I'm talking to somebody from North Lawrence, they really are keenly aware of the water, standing water, pooling water, running water issue there. And it just seems like anything we can do to try to take strain off of this system where we're dealing with failing pumps and then auxiliary pumps don't kick in and stuff like that, it can't be bad in the larger scheme of things. So there, now I toss it to you.
I took some notes. So first of all, I don't think Catherine and I can speak to a pump failure or a pump did not fail. I'm not aware of anything, and if I was, again, I don't have the expertise to discuss that.
I do know the pump failed, or there was a failure at the pump, but I don't know the extent of what caused the failure, so we can't speak to that part.
And I'd like to address kind of some of what you talked about other gravel drives in North Lawrence. I printed off this scary-looking old text. This is from our 49 zoning code, and I have also printed off our paving standards from our 66 zoning code. So that was the last zoning code before our current one. And the oldest code didn't address gravel. It didn't even address materials. It just addressed where you could park your car. That, obviously, it was a different time. Under the 66 code, they don't address gravel as a permitted material at all. They don't consider the floodplain. It wasn't a permitted driveway material. So when you see so many gravel drives up in North Lawrence, that's a result of just the time of construction. At that time, they weren't looking at the material of the driveway. That doesn't mean that they're grandfathered. We don't really use that term. They're kind of just existing nonconformities, they're an existing condition that if the site was scraped, they'd be required to come into compliance. I took a brief look at some of the past recent variances we've done for the same thing. We've done some on elm, we've done some on ash, some on locust, some on lion. So they've come, and we've recommended approval, and we've recommended denial. So we really are thinking about it, and we really are thinking about some of the conditions that you just addressed. And to hit it home, and you're not gonna like this point, is it goes back to what this board does.
Yeah.
And this board doesn't get to make code, it doesn't get to think what could be better and what we think might align with the city's goals a little bit better. Unfortunately, that's, other commissions and other boards. We have to really look at what the code does allow and what it doesn't allow. Yeah, if you.
Yeah, so one other thing too to keep in mind with North Lawrence is as the city has over time made infrastructure improvements, and since the levy has gone in, those FEMA maps have adjusted over time. So in the past, much more of North Lawrence was in the regulatory floodplain than it is now. So as those types of things are evolving, the city code is also, North Lawrence is kind of slow to come up to where our current code standards might be, just because the existing conditions at a time prior to these codes have different water requirements, floodplain requirements, different areas were in the floodplain that maybe are not in the floodplain anymore. So that might be why it seems like North Lawrence has a large proportion of gravel in areas that typically would not be designed as gravel for driveways and parking areas. And as those things evolve, the code has tried to evolve as well to take those things into consideration. And so that's just something to think about. North Lawrence is a little unique in that regard, whereas other parts of the city may not be, so.
I think it's just, I'm not really refuting anything you're saying, I'm just saying, I think we would all agree though that it is an area that's also unique in that I think it's uniquely vulnerable to standing water in that area. And it's something that I think we just keep hearing over and over when people come in here. Something that they always seem to keep a weather eye on those events.
I have a question for staff. They keep talking that concrete or asphalt would be their only option, but the next, number 2, page 2 of the staff report talks about grid unit pavers with grass or concrete, brick, or clay. Those would be permeable options that would be allowed by code?
That's correct.
Okay.
Can you speak to when that was added to the code?
Well, this is part of the when this current land development code was adopted in 2006. So it's all part of that same code.
And I would say the 1966 code also has the same grid unit pavers, that type of material.
Okay. Luke, when you were presenting, I heard something that sounded like there had been new additions to the code to address this, and that sounded more recent times.
Yes, yeah, so not yet. Our planner, Mary Miller, she's kind of spearheading some amendments to the overall parking, Article 9, which is our parking chapter of the Land Development Code. And one of a couple amendments would address gravel. It would, as it's proposed, would no longer be permitted anywhere in the city, even in regulatory floodplain. As part of that, additional, more pervious options would be created. So I talked about those concrete strips with the grass median. We've seen that come along a little bit recently. And then additionally, they were going to be adding porous and pervious pavement options as well.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
And I just want to say, that has not been approved by any commissions or anything.
That's fair.
So it's just a plan that staff is.
It's at the staff level.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
All right, so let's start a discussion here. We can always ask staff if they have any questions. Thoughts, feelings?
Yeah, I'd like to address the uniqueness question. I think that North Lawrence overall is unique in the city as a whole because of their drainage issues. I also think that this area is perhaps unique within North Lawrence. As I always do, I went out and looked at the site. That block is full of gravel driveways. Moreover, what I found quite interesting is that Ash Street has a 600 block as well as a 700 block, and the entire 600 block street is gravel. And I think it is a little bizarre that we're telling people that they can't have a gravel driveway when the city has not even upgraded a city street to a standard pavement right there, like half a block away. So I think that is a very unique factor. And I really have no problem with the first condition being met by these applicants.
As a point of clarification, I'm looking at the city GIS, and I am curious, there are houses with 600 Ash addresses, but there's no city right away there or anything like that. It's an interesting point. Yeah.
And so, I believe that's, I would have to do some research, we would have to do some research on that, but it appears that it potentially was vacated at some point, and did not go all the way through, so it was not developed as a city street,
Mhm.
even though they have a 600 address. It would require a little research into the development of the property to see exactly.
That's fine.
Regardless, it is an existing condition.
It's there. Are we gonna do these one at a time?
All right, if anybody has any general thoughts. Okay.
I'm in agreement with
Okay.
Barry on uniqueness.
Yes, we'll tackle these one at a time. Give me a second. Item 1, variance request arises from such conditions that are unique to the property. Does anybody have any trouble getting around that one?
No,
Okay. That granting the variance would not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners. Number 2.
the property owner that would be most impacted is here tonight and indicated he'd support this variance request, so I'm inclined to say that I can get around number 2 as well.
Staff agreed that
Yeah,
it would not.
nobody else.
Okay, I'm going to skip number 3. We're going to go down to number 4, that the variance desired will not adversely affect the public health, safety, morals, order, convenience, general welfare.
I respect staff's opinion, but I reviewed the last time we discussed this, and I know there's not precedent, but the last time it was discussed, I think that what was brought up in testimony based on observations of conditions specifically on that street, actually believe you used to live on that street as well, that bigger concern was not the gravel making its way into the waterways. It was if the more surfaces that were impermeable, the more water, the more runoff that would be created was a much greater hazard. So with respect to number 4, I would also say that I am good with the variance because I think it actually probably, not only does it not adversely impact public health and safety, it may be better for public health and safety.
And I also appreciate, you had some comments that I really appreciated, talking about how, like, the stormwater engineers have thought through this stuff. They've thought about the runoff. They've thought about what's happening inside the storm sewers, what's happening with gravel, getting out onto the streets and stuff like that.
And that is why it's a little bit different than the 2018 variance. Those conversations were had for this one.
Right. Yeah. And I just, I don't know if you can pull it up there, but the city storm sewers on the GIS map, there wasn't like a continuous storm sewer. When I pulled it up, just maybe a few drainage canals and
It's an open, it's the ditch style, the exposed ditch.
and even with that, it didn't make it all the way across. Like, it's, even at their properties, it like petered out.
I did a site visit the other day, and the GIS graphic, which is the hashed green color, it doesn't extend here. In real life, the ditch comes and goes, it's a North Lawrence exposed drainage ditch.
And it's been my experience, where you're dealing with an exposed draining ditch, even though now we might do things like pave the ditch or, cover it, make it, whatever, tunnel, but just having an exposed ditch, that goes back to, it's permeable. That's the whole thing, it's permeable and it has value, and that's why they used it for, the first 200 years of the Republic, is because they work. The water runs, but the water's also going into the ground as it's running through there, so.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think the water in these ditches run. Would you agree with that statement, Stephen? Like,
The problem with the ditches is the culverts have all collapsed
yeah,
along the driveways, and they're 1 million years old.
yeah,
So the water is contained within the culverts that have failed. So really, at the end of the day, the entire ditch should probably be repaired. And we talked to Matt Lawton about eventually, getting that.
And when we talk about code compliant driveway, apron, curb cut, part of that is the analysis of, is a culvert required? In this case, it sounds like it wasn't, but that's one thing they do address when they do those concrete aprons, is get those tunneled culverts in.
yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on number 4 from the board? Okay. Go to number 5. That granting the variance would not be opposed to the general spirit and intent of the code. Any thoughts? No. Okay, we're going to return to number 3 here. That the strict application of the provisions would constitute an unnecessary hardship upon a property owner represented at the application.
I think there's some other pervious options that they have that are allowed by code, so I don't think it's one or the other, like they're presenting it. So I'm gonna be not supporting the variance because I think they have some other options.
And that's well taken. I would simply say, if you look at it, big picture, allowing this permeable driveway, it's going to help mitigate water pooling and running on the street, which is going to be good for the applicant. Because it just makes travel in the area safer, it just will. I know that the city envisions fighting this pooling water issue a little differently, but I don't know that it's quite happened yet.
I think it could be a hardship in that there is a shared easement which is already approved as gravel, and to use some other option for the remainder of their driveway could be awkward from a design point of view.
That's the Historic Resources Commission, not the Board of Zoning Appeals. Just kidding.
I don't
Just
think
joking.
this is historic, but it is a hardship question.
So 2 points. The easement area was not part of the 2018 variance, and so because it's gravel today, is more of a result of the applicant needed a way to get to the driveway. And we had discussed back then, we knew this would be coming down the pike, and so it was understood that it wouldn't go to concrete without having this variance go first. And I just will remind everybody, the definition of unnecessary hardship really relies on the fact that the applicant can't use that property for a code compliant use anymore.
I guess I'll just say that I'm okay with granting a variance due to unnecessary hardship, just because I haven't been presented with evidence that there's another surface that will mitigate any flooding concerns in this area, which I think are, whether or not it's in a floodplain, there's enough evidence to support that flooding is a major issue, and gravel's proved to be something that is permeable, and I haven't seen anything to support another surface that is conforming, that can be used.
Oh goodness, yeah, is there anything that we can address, like rough permeability coefficients for these various things?
Well, when an applicant submits an application, they can certainly submit specs for their proposed material, but that was not presented in the application.
Okay. Well, I think my general feelings right now is I'm just uncomfortable with this. Mostly just because I remember a year and a half ago when the applicant at 718 came, and there was this idea of like cohesive, and that would see you a month or two later, and we'd roll this around. I personally have a gravel variance on my driveway in North Lawrence that was granted in this room. And I feel like historically, again, not that we get to set precedents or anything like that, but North Lawrence has always been this kind of exception to the rule, and that we were trying to use this variance process as a way to grant some alleviation of the flooding in North Lawrence. And yet, in the light of our roles and what's going on, that seems to maybe have been an abuse of that power in the past. And we're now stuck in a position where a variance that was made 15 months ago or something like that would not be granted, being that the literally right next to each other in the same part of town. You know, neighbors, and in what is what I consider both beautiful, two very great additions to the North Lawrence neighborhood. So, those are my thoughts. I don't enjoy being in this position and might simply abstain from the vote at this point.
I would simply say, and maybe this is some explanation to staff who've had to wrestle with me for the last year and a half or whatnot, but maybe I'm particularly poorly suited to this job because, you know, I'm an attorney, and I would say my short explanation of what attorneys do is they dwell where the gray is. Because where you have bright lines, everybody knows where they are and everybody knows what they're supposed to do. But where lawyers get involved, it's because there's some exception or something that's different that causes the bright lines not to work. And so that's the world that I live in day to day, you know?
Calvin's going to speak in just a minute, but I would just remind you all of the presentation that we watched a few months ago. This process is alleviating situations where a property can't be used for that use.
True, but the thing is these 5 points for analysis, they are inherently subjective. They are. And so your admonitions are well taken every time, and I listen to you every time. But as I look through here, you know, I can look at these points where there's disagreement between, say, myself and staff, and I can look at this and I can make the argument to myself, yeah, I see where the exception is.
I was just going to address, just a reminder, once the item has begun, a commissioner or board member cannot abstain from the vote.
Oh.
That has to be done at the beginning prior to any items. If you feel you have to recuse, that would be when that would take place. So once the item is in process, you can't actually abstain.
Thank you. I did not know that. I thought that was a viable. You can abstain from other things as well, correct?
Well, you can abstain from voting for, say, like minutes. If you were not present during the time when the minutes were, or when the meeting was, that's something where you actually can't vote on that because you weren't there. You don't know if the minutes are accurate. So you could abstain from that because you don't have relevant knowledge.
Or whether there's a conflict of interest. For example, you own the property or for some other reason like that, you would need to abstain. But typically that happens ahead of time under the bylaws, unless you have some type of conflict or you weren't at the meeting, then
We have to vote yet.
the responsibility is to vote. Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. I appreciate that. Didn't know that.
Well, somebody ought to just make a motion, I think, and we'll figure out where the votes are.
I've heard at least two.
Sorry, or were you doing that?
You're better at it than me, why don't you? Give it a shot.
I'll, if the chair is okay with it, I will make a motion.
Make a motion is likely the most interesting vote we've had here in a while.
I don't know about that, but, I would move that, we approve the variance request to allow the applicant to use gravel for the residential driveway surface, instead of the pavement surface standards identified in section 20-913E of the Land Development Code, due to it meeting all 5 of the criteria for a variance.
I will second that.
All right. We got a motion and a second. We're going to vote. Would you like a show of hands
Yes, please.
this time? All right. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? All right. Motion carries.
Motion carried.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. The house is beautiful. I take a picture of it every morning. So. Okay. I'll just be the creepy guy, take a picture for everyone.
We've had way creepier days as it's,
I mean, they do back to the levee, so I'm sure that they do creepier things.
Okay. I don't see any other agenda items, and our training is not part of,
Walking out the door, yes,
is,
so.
okay,
we-
but it's not part of this meeting, correct?
It was, so our annual coma training was scheduled for this meeting, but,
I have to go.
yeah. He has to go, yeah.
A little longer than we anticipated.
Okay,
So we will be probably moving that to February.
okay.
Thank you, Randy.
Then I would take a motion to adjourn the Board of Appeals.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Aye. And we do not have a sign code this evening because it was deferred as well.
And just for FYI, we may not have any, if the appeal and sign code come back for February, you might have those items for February, otherwise.
Nothing.
That's all we have so far on the agenda. We'll know more tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah.
3 PM.
Is there any way, just, I mean, instead of letting us know like 4 days, a week prior, that if, is there any way like to bump that up? I mean, I know there's the appeals, so
What do
you
you
may
mean,
not.
like, if they decide to defer to?
You- This may not be the best example, but if there's no appeals pending and it hits the next day and nothing happens, is there a way to give us more than like
Oh, I see what you're saying.
4 or 5
before,
days notice
yeah.
that there's
So,
not
like,
gonna be a
if there's
meeting?
not gonna be a meeting, yes,
Yeah.
we can definitely let you know if we don't have anything on the agenda. We probably won't know about the appeal until it gets closer to the meeting.
Understand this is a
But,
unique situation, but
yes.
that's not very
Yes.
frequently, we don't usually have appeals pending.
Correct.
So, okay.
But yes, in those instances, we can, if we know definitively there is not gonna be a meeting, we can let you know as soon as possible.
That'd be awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And we're going back to our first Thursday of the month now.
Yep.
This was just an anomaly meeting schedule, so, okay.
We have 2 anomaly meetings this year though, right? July too?
Yeah, the
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the board, Jennifer.
And I don't think, I'm late.